Welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today we're going to kind of mimic what we did in our previous tutorial, which was replicating a photograph here on the left hand side with our design on the right. Now immediately I want you to take the pressure off. We do not have a timed element to today's version, so you don't need to worry about the timer and you can spend as long or as little as you like. Hopefully my sort of narrative throughout the whole of this will help you in terms of what I'm looking for as I'm going. And my commentary. And as you can see, we are not mimicking this pixel for pixel. There's a few very vital differences. First of all, we blurred the background because I wanted to give focus to our subject here. We can take artistic liberties wherever we like, whenever we like. It's your work, you can pick and choose. And then also, I'm not using a brush that would replicate this perfectly because this, you probably want something a bit sharper, whereas I'm using a brush that is simply made up of charcoals. So we're going to get a slightly different effect, which is why I also blurred the background. So we get that little bit of sharpness back in our work. Now this is going to be, as I said, a little bit more independent. You are going to have to hand pick colors and then draw them out on the right hand side. So there's a little bit of kind of looking for the colors, and hopefully with my continued commentary throughout the whole of this tutorial, you'll be able to understand what it is I'm looking for as I'm doing it and my processes with replicating this image. And then maybe you'll be able to take this into your own work, because ultimately, if you can do today's tutorial, there's nothing to stop you from grabbing a photo from any other sort of website, Google, Pinterest, whatever you want, and just learning how to replicate it over on the side in your own time, in your own style, and just, you know, learning to replicate rather than potentially like following tutorials, which of course I'd love the views. And if you are a frequent viewer, please subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to hit 60k and we're getting very close, but I need all the support I can get. I really mean that. So hopefully you enjoyed today's tutorial. The only things you're going to need is the photograph and the canvas size. If you tap on the description of this video, it will take you to a requirements section in there. And if you tap on that link, it will take you to my Patreon where you can grab the requirements for today's design completely for free. And while you're there, check out my Patreon, because that's where I post 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters. And there's a catalogue of over 160 exclusive tutorials that are not available here on YouTube. They're only available on Patreon. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Tag me in your finished creations when you're done, like on Instagram and Facebook. And with all that said, let's get started. So we need to do a couple of things once you've created your canvas. The first thing, just like on mine, you're going to want to go to your actions, tap on the canvas tab, then go ahead and edit the drawing guide and also turn it on. So turn it on, edit the drawing guide, and set your 2D grid to around about 332. Then hit the tick. Then of course you want to go ahead and add the image in. So you need to go to your actions again, hit the option of add and insert the photo from your files or your photos depending on where you saved it to. Once you've tapped on it, it will import the image, and then all you want to do is make sure snapping is turned on in the bottom left, and then you just go ahead and drag that all the way to the left hand side till you hit the orange line, and then you are top left completely aligned to the actual canvas. And then we can get started. Now, as I've maybe mentioned, but I've done previously in the other sort of replication tutorial that we did here on YouTube, we are not trying to replicate this pixel for pixel for pixel for pixel. You just want to try and get the same kind of aesthetic. And that's really important because straight off the bat, I am not going to use brushes that would give me the finest and sharpest image to replicate that. I'm going to be using the charcoals collection. So straight off the bat, we're immediately picking brushes that are not going to give us that look. We're going to get a more stylized look. And that's really important just to take the pressure off yourself. So again, this is going to be a little bit of kind of independent learning. I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing as I do it. It will be a little bit more easier to follow in terms of the previous one because the steps involved, there are stages to this, and you can just follow suit and also do it in your own independent way. For example, there's no palette. We're just going to select the colors. So the first thing we want to do is create a new layer, drag it underneath the image. So our image stays at the very top all the time. We're going to go ahead and grab this dark blue in here, and then just drag it onto the screen because that's the darkest kind of blue from the whole sort of background scene. I can work with that. And then I want to go ahead and grab one of these like more hazy blues here. So probably starting off around about, say, here. Grab that blue there. So just from in there. And then I'm going to go to my brush. I'm going to go to charcoals, and we are going to be using the Nut Grove brush. It's completely a default, and starting off about 26%. I want to go ahead and kind of just get some swoop lines. Now look at the top here with the surface of the water. We've got all those lovely ripples. So I've got about 19% on the brush size, just trying to replicate a little bit of that kind of lined effect coming in. And again, I do not want this to look exactly like the photograph. We are just going to replicate it, and then if it's on finish, slightly different, that's fine. We're just trying to see if we can do that. That's more the important phase of this sort of part of my YouTube channel at the minute. It's just trying to sort of teach you that you can just learn to replicate. You don't have to, make pixel for pixel exactly the same. So you can see I've got some like curved lines in there, and then the lines get a little bit thinner. And use the guide as well. Like, look, they tend to, in this sort of second row down, a little bit thinner. So I've gone down to like an 8%. We're just going to get some thinner lines in there. And I don't care necessarily about their sort of positioning. Again, pixel perfect. Just going to run them in there. There's a few that run across from over here too, and get some thin lines in the big lines as well at the top. And that's going to be a rough look towards that. And in the middle here, probably want to be around about 18%. Just get a bit more blue, because that will just sit somewhat in behind our jellyfish. And then I'm going to go down to like a 11%, just a few more just in the distance. Now, if we take a look up here, then we can grab like a more fluorescent blue up here. You can see the difference in the color, and we'll just chuck that in there now. It starts to really make this look a lot more vibrant towards the top end of the scene. About 9% on the brush size, so I can get some more purposeful, thinner lines in here. And of course, we're going to then move into white tones in a minute. And there's a lot of little sort of dashes. If you take a look, like, it's not uniformed as lines the whole way through. There's a lot of like, if I can go down to like 4%, there's a lot of these like little patches, of course, which are the waves above the surface. So I can just get a lot of sort of little dashes and streaks in here. Look at how it comes down the edge of the frame as well, down to like here a little bit more. There we go, a couple more like that. And then I'll probably just try and squeeze in a bit more vibrancy over there. A couple more like so. And then again, just let's see if we can get an ever so slightly more bright tone. We can't. So we've already done that. Now for me, the water at the top here has this kind of light blue haze around it. You've got like the whites, then these kind of grey tones, and then a little bit of kind of bluish kind of white. So we're going to grab a bluish white there. And again, the simple process here is it goes right down the middle of our sort of canvas here, and then off to the right hand side. So we're just going to kind of, again, sort of somewhat mimic that. I'm going to get this sort of light blue in here. It kind of just wiggles its way down into here. Look at this, one whole motion comes across, and then by the end it kind of fizzles out down here, doesn't it? And then if we just get that in here, we can get a few more little patches like up here. We'll move into the brightest tone in a second. And again, over here, there's lots of little dashes and patches of beautiful sun dashing itself onto the top surface. There's lots of little just unevenness. Now, eventually, just for the sake of today's tutorial, and to sort of, again, maybe hopefully take the pressure off you a little bit, I'm going to blur this background anyway, because I want to have that really soft aesthetic to the background. And I want it will add some sharpness to the jellyfish because of the brushes we're using today. It will hopefully sort of give us that sharpness back a little bit. And then in here, there's a lot of sort of quite bright tones here. So I am going to sort of punch this sort of grey tone in here a little bit. And that kind of trickles down in towards there a little bit, doesn't it? There's one just on the line, that's fine. And there's a little bit more over here as well. A couple more little dashes along here. And then we're going to move into the white. So I'm going to grab the white, probably around about that 9 or 8% brush size still. I can make sure, first of all, right up here in the middle, that is super bright, isn't it? And then there's like a slightly brighter patch here. That wiggles its way into there. Lovely. And then let's keep going into there. And there's lots of very, very small patches. So I can probably just, again, get away with pressing quite firm to get some lovely little sort of patches of brightness throughout the whole of this top scene here. So we've got to keep going, get all of those kind of ripples in. Again, this is going to get blurred, so it really doesn't matter too much if you don't get too much like detail necessarily. We're just trying to see what we can see. And a lot of people gave me a lot of feedback from the first one, which is why I've taken the timer off of this one. You can just sort of draw with me, and then a lot of people also enjoyed listening to what it is I'm looking for and what I look for in sort of this particular kind of environment of drawing. And seeing what they then can sort of look for, because you develop a skill eventually of having to being able to understand an image enough to be able to break it down and then redraw it. And so that's what I see a lot of the time, is I'll see like an image and go, how can I replicate that? And I look at it and break down the stages in my head ahead of us actually doing it. Now I'm going to go ahead and just go back over here. I want to get some more like beautiful sort of teal colours in here, a few more like smaller streaks running through here. This has got a much brighter top half of the canvas, so I am gonna chuck in a little bit more up here. It's a lot more vibrant than I've probably given on. Now down here I can see two colours. We've got this kind of tone here in the middle, and then we've got these little dots of like brighter tone. Essentially it's just a curve, isn't it, if you take a look at that? So about 26%. I'm just going to go ahead and run that. You can use the guide. You can see it runs roughly up to that line. So if I get really light with my pressure around about here, I can start letting that fade out. And then I can just colour in the whole bottom of my scene with some lovely tones, and then get in there and grab some of the brighter spots. And just like we did at the top, you just patch it in now. All those little sort of glimmers of the light coming from above. Some slightly larger ones here, and then I'll go a bit smaller, like a 4%. So I can get some more little dashes in here. Lots of little dashes just running across that floor. Can I pick out a slightly brighter tone? I think I must have already selected the absolute brightest. It's not to say you can't then just go up to your colour wheel, drag that over towards the whites a little bit more, and get a few additional little sort of speckles of little brightness. Now, if we take a look at the whole design, in this area here, you can see these little sort of very light purpley blue dashes that just give a little bit of kind of noise to the background. And I just want to get as many of those in before we blur the background. I mean, we can save the background blurring, to be fair, until much later in the design. Also, you'll notice there's actually a lot more kind of teal blue as well around this area here. So I'm going to have to try and just kind of squeeze that in amongst all my sort of white tones here. I need to make sure it replicates that a little bit, because I need that colour for my jellyfish to live on top of, so it gives it that vibrancy. So even though I've drawn some here, that will kind of get lost in behind our jellyfish shortly anyway. But I just want to make sure I get some of those quite bright teal colours in there. I can always go ahead and jump back to like a whitish tone and just dash that back on top to just reintroduce all those colours on top of the teal if necessary. That's looking really good. I'm very happy with that. I think we could probably go to like super white, to be honest with you. There is a little speckle of that round about just there, isn't there? And I could definitely get involved here with like a 3 or 4%, just to make sure that there's some really lovely vibrant dashes in here where that sun is just beaming through onto our scene, brightening up the whole thing. So lots of sort of simple sort of techniques really for the background, and as I mentioned, you can keep hold of it. You can blur it either. I mean, what I would do is typically in my own work is I'd swipe that to the left and duplicate it, and then I would blur the top one, go to my adjustments and Gaussian blur, swipe from left to right up to like a 7% in my pre-practices looked really good. So I'm going to do it to around about, do you know what, I'm going to go up to that 7% and I'm going to tap on my adjustments. Now this is where we take a little bit of an artistic liberty in comparison to the actual image, because we're blurring it. That is blurry, but it's nowhere near towards that kind of level in my opinion. I mean, you could, for instance, get back in there now and draw back in some of those white dots if you wanted to on top of the blurred. So that gives you a little bit more sharpness. But for my design, I want to make sure that the jellyfish is our prime focus, and quite literally focus, because the background is out of focus now. So I've created a new layer in front of the background. I'm just going to go to my colors and double tap in the top left to select white. Sticking with the same brush, we want to go ahead and we want to draw in the top of the jellyfish. Now, you could just draw a circle, chop away at it, push it around a little bit. So you don't need to kind of make sure it sort of looks correct straight away. I've got a brush size around about 6%. And I'm going to kind of just come in from here. I can see that kind of point. I'm using the grid. The grid method is so valuable when you're first starting off to try and replicate like photos, because it just gives you that little bit of a nod, just so you get your positioning just about right. And you can make sure that your scale is also very good as well. It matches up nicely to the reference image. So that's roughly going to be my shape, and I can just fill that in with a slightly bigger brush size. It's probably a little bit too big, gone a bit too wide at the top there. This is just going to end up as like a guide shape, to be honest, because we'll grab our eraser, we'll sharpen that up a little bit. Now I can see it's got like a more of a flat sort of dome to the top. So there we go. I can just sort of chop the top off and then round that off a little bit in those kind of corners, sharpen up the shape just a little bit. At the bottom it kind of comes in, but then it comes into like a bit of a flat sort of shape there. So that's pretty much the shape that we're going to need. And you can tap on that and bring it all the way down to around about, say, 18%, because we don't actually need that fully. It's almost going to be like that translucent effect that we're going to keep hold of. Now I'm going to create a separate layer. I'm going to keep the same brush. Now, because we are utilizing the fact of our layers, if I go to my actions and go to preferences, you can see I've got brush cursor turned on, and that is that shape that you can see it. Look at that around my brush head here. Now, because I've got that on, I can actually just try and marry up my size as much as possible. This will help you in the future kind of also gauge, like I can see there around about 9%. If I start lightly and then press a little bit firmer, I can pretty much marry that shape of our design. And because it's tucked underneath all those lines that I just drew underneath the photograph, it doesn't matter, because at the very end, we're going to crop this down the middle and you'll just have your image left. So what I'm looking for, let's start at the front of all of these, what would you call these? I guess like tentacles, either. This one here, this is our main one. Just comes down, cuts the corner, leaves you like a little triangle here, and then it just drops its tail into there. And then we've got a secondary one in here, followed by a third one back here, and then this one here kicks out at the bottom here. That's number 4. There's probably more in there, but we can't see it from our particular perspective. So what we then want to do is we just want to go from the sort of base of our jellyfish that we've already drawn and start to try and replicate those shapes. Now, you may not do it perfectly first time. Now, I need my brush. I need that to be set to 9% because I was on the eraser. I want to start roughly here. I want to let that kind of come down into there and then let that kind of fade out. Now that one's maybe a little bit too heavy, so that's where the pressure sensitivity of the brush is kind of throwing that off. I'm going to come down here, I can press quite firm and then let that get really light, and I've gone too far. So maybe it's easier to start down here, come in and then up and in towards our jellyfish. You can always go ahead and of course erase part of it and then just connect in the new bit. This is all going to be translucent, really sort of super transparent. That's the only word. I was looking for another one, but it's almost like a guide at this point, to be honest with you. And then also remember, you can use tools like adjustments and liquefy. Use the option of push, and you can always just grab it, move it up a tiny bit if you need to, like really get that brush and the stroke exactly where you kind of need it. Again, the guide will help you a massive amount with that. Now I'm just lightly pushing it around to try and get the exact shape I need. And I think all in all, that looks pretty good. So I am now going to do them all on the same layer, but if you want to, you could put them on separate layers so you can go ahead and use that liquefy effect if you need to again. Now this one here needs to come sort of down here, comes through there, and then just kind of flicks off at the bottom, doesn't it? So I'm going to redo that one again, but with a little bit more purpose to it, like that. And I can see I've gone a bit too far. I'm keeping these in the video because I want you to be able to see what it is I do and look for, and to make sure that you also can see those things as well. Now we've got another one that comes all the way from in here. It comes through here, doesn't it? And then again, it get that lovely kick out at the bottom. And then we've got this one here at the back. So that comes from around about here. And it looks like it just sort of trickles in behind this one. So we end up with all of our kind of tentacles all stuck together here. Perfect. Again, we can tap on them, bring them all the way down to like a 25% just to get us started with. They're just a guide. So I'm going to carry on with the tentacles. Now, let's take a look at them. They're very much this dotted fashion, aren't they? And then as the sort of 3D-ness of the tentacle kind of rolls over onto the opposite side, you get this dark edge to it. So it's literally like a dark border followed by a lot of dots in the middle. And also we've got this beautiful frilly kind of look to it, beautiful colors in there as well. And we were going to replicate exactly that. So let's zoom in. Just grab the dark tone from the center of this line here, this main line running through. We're going to go to our brush. Now I have swiped Nutgrove to the left and duplicated it. That's what this one here is above. And then you'll need to tap on the brush. You then need to go up here. So potentially this menu might sort of hide. You need to be up here at stroke path, and you want the spacing set to about 82%. You can see there you get these dashes, and we're going to use that as our little dots. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the tick. Now this brush is pressure sensitive, so you do need to press quite firm, and you'll need to sort of try and match up the scale a little bit. So we're going to follow that main one down here. So I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to make sure I create a new layer. that is in front of the tentacles, and I'm just going to have a look. And then that's a little bit kind of too spaced out, so I'm going to zoom the brush size down a little bit, and I want to get that edge. Now, it's not going to match up perfectly. Again, this is part and parcel of this design today. I want to get that kind of edge in there a little bit, probably bring the brush size down to an even smaller 1%. I'm going to go down the very bottom edge here. Now, because it's pressure sensitive, you can also let that pressure get really light as it gets back up towards the main body up here. You can see it kind of fades out, doesn't it, into that lovely pink. But you can always overlap your lines a few more times. So I'm bringing that brush size down to like a 1%, much smaller, and I can just really build out that outline. I can see it kind of starts to fade off towards the bottom here, doesn't it? As it just trickles across the grid line here. So I'm going to let that kind of trickle out. I'm going to make sure I sort of get back in here, draw over the whole thing a few more times, and just try and get that solid edge like that. And then don't worry about drawing in every single one of them. Of course not. We want to just simply go ahead and just sort of start to fill in the center of here. Make sure you just leave some gaps in between and utilizing the spacing of the brush, because that's all I would look for. I just look and say, well, yeah, it's clearly got a load more spacing in it. So I can just bring that all the way down. It comes all the way into here just before we get to that frilly bit, which, to be fair, the frilly bit we'll be able to draw on top of anyway, on top of these like dots. I'm just going to darken up that edge a bit more, get that in there, and then just seeing what we see. That's got a little bit of that translucent effect to it, which I do like. And I'm going to make sure I just get a few more dots up towards the top up here, and get a little bit more here as well. Now, this won't give you exactly the same effect, of course, as there, but for the sake of today as well, I'm not going to sit here and draw all of those in. Now, otherwise, we can go back to the Nutgrove regular brush above that we already had. Again, bring that brush size down to like the same size, and you can just somewhat color in that sort of top edge to make it a lot more solid, like so. Likewise, this bottom line here too. So in case you see like a few dots that are a little bit kind of too prominent on their own, you can then undo it, and then you still get that lovely effect. I'm going to go back to the Nutgrove with the spacing, probably just try and chuck a bit more in here, because they are quite, you can see quite a few of them in there, but they tend to be a little bit smaller, don't they? So I might have to go all the way down to its very, very smallest size that I can get, and just see if I can draw in some more. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to just use the pressure sensitivity to kind of fade that out, let that kind of drift off. And there we go. The end there is all simply going to be the sort of pink frilly effect, which we will come back to. So we're then going to go ahead and grab the dark tone here for the next one just in behind it. So grabbing the darkest color, I'm going to zoom across. And again, that one comes in from here. You can see it gets really light. And this is basically one-sided, right? Whereas this one had it on both sides, the dark line. This dark line comes down here, and then it just stipples out and fades out. It's basically like a stipple tattoo. So you're just going to start here. You want to be as close to where your edge is going to be as possible. Kind of fade that back up and into the rest of the body. And then this is lovely. Look at this underneath here. It's just a gradient of like stipple. And it fades out the bottom. You can let your pressure get nice and light. So once you've got kind of done your outline, go back to your regular Nutgrove brush again. Get that size all the way down. And then just maybe just thicken that line up the tiniest bit. And then go back to the spaced out version. And now start just creating a lovely gradient of dots, basically. Lovely. Let that kind of fade in there. So I'm basically using it like any other brush now, except it's just in a dot format. So I'm just letting those dots kind of fade out towards the bottom. And if you go past your little white tentacles that we've just drawn in, I apologize if, by the way, if that's the incorrect terminology. Listen, I'm just trying to draw something. I'm not a biologist or anything like that, or marine or whatever you want to call it. We are just going to keep those dots going all the way down. And if you go past the end there, you can let them kind of fade out into the murkiness of the water. And then we're going to repeat. This edge over here is quite dark, isn't it? If we grab that color, it's also going to probably be a little bit more blue as well. So if I zoom out, and again, zoom across to here, don't worry about the colors as well, because in a minute we have the option, should we need it, to just change the color. So I'm going to get that edge in there. I can see it goes under here, flicks out, and then just fades out again. So you can just let that color get really light. I'm going to switch back to the normal Nutgrove brush. Just get that color all the way up to here. Now it's quite dark and black almost, but we'll fix it. We'll go back to the spaced out version and again get that stippled effect. So utilizing the brushes to create different effects, you know, potentially as well saving yourself a lot of time. And again, we're just going to keep going there. Now, don't forget, in your own personal work, you would have as much time as you wanted. So if you wanted to manually draw those in, I urge you to, you know, consider the idea, especially if you've got the time. For a tutorial like this, I have to think about the duration a little bit, and also, like, you know, try and potentially provide you with the quickest and easiest methods sometimes to do things. I'm also going to zoom in again, grab the exact same kind of process and color. So this one's a little bit kind of more reddy gray, but we want to add some more colors in there in a minute. So I'm going to go straight to the Nutgrove though. I'm going to draw that outline in first. So I'm going to keep that super light, and then I'm going to bring that line round here. And then just trying to just draw that edge, and then go back to my brush with the spaced out version. And again, let's get that little bit of a stipple kind of effect going on all the way up towards the top. These ones are like really like all over the place. So if I just start drawing my brush at a bit of an angle, I'll get the dots in a slightly different pattern, and then they can just like nicely just blend out like so. And they don't need to be super sort of, again, matching up to the actual image. It's just your own version of it. Now, what's really fun here is if we go ahead and create a new layer underneath those dots, there's a lot of color in here, isn't there? So let's go back to our normal Nutgrove brush, because that's the main brush for today. If I zoom in here, look at all these beautiful colors. We've got the blue into the pinks, and there's some variations in there of reds. So I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in into a gap and grab what I think is like the pinkish tone. Set my brush size probably like 5 or 6%, and I picked it up from around about here, so I can start just painting underneath the dots, getting that lovely bit of color in there, blending that kind of out. Go up into here where I can see a little bit of a gap. The color somewhat changes, it gets a little bit more saturated. And I can color this in kind of quite firm, but in the end I will only end up kind of just maybe making the layer perhaps a little bit more faint later on. Now this is really important. I've grabbed the color from here, which is like a pinkish purple color, just in there. It's quite white as well, as it connects itself into the body up here. I'm going to blend that down a little bit as well. Zooming in, there's like a little bit of purple kind of coloring just happening just behind here, a little bit into there, and there's also like a little bit of kind of pinky purple. And I'm sort of showing you where I'm collecting it from and then zooming in, because you want to make sure you zoom in and get the exact correct color. You don't want to sort of guesstimate it too much. So we've got some lovely color in there. And then I think that's pretty much it in terms of selecting the colors. There's probably the question of saying, well, actually, some of these dots are a little bit more red here on this middle column. So if I now go back to the lines that we already created and just simply tap on them and alpha lock them, the dots and the lines, especially here on that main structure in the middle, I can just dance the red on top of there as well, getting that lovely variation in color. So it fades out into a dark tone, but then there's the reds running through. The same can be said here as well. There's a little bit more red over there, isn't there? It's a little bit darker, mind you, but get that variation in the color. And that's pretty good. I think I could otherwise sort of get in there maybe and say, well, some of these are a little bit more gray rather than black. See how they're black on the edge and a bit gray here? So I can zoom in here now and color this in, and that gives me that bit more of a translucent effect, doesn't it? At random, I'll just sort of position that in there just to kind of fade them out. And that's looking good. I'm very happy with that. Now, while we're working with this kind of effect, we'll carry on for a minute and we will come back to here because we've got these lovely pink frillish areas to do. Now, the actual we've got sort of two layers to this, haven't we? We've got this transparent kind of dome over the top, and then we've got these colors sat underneath. I want to get this kind of bubble kind of brain area here done. So I'm going to grab this like pinkish tone here that sits in between the dots. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. So this is on a separate layer. It's going to sit above, and then I can start to kind of color in that line here as it kind of comes across I'm not drawing in every bit, so I'm not trying to just draw in that line. I'm just trying to get blocked in levels of color in here, and they kind of fade down as well, like in towards the tentacles as well. So again, apologies if it's the wrong terminology, but that's not the focus of this, is it? And then I'm going to go ahead and also just zoom in and grab the white towards the top up here. There's a bright white there, just so I can get the sort of dimensions in place. So I can see, especially if we take a look at our guide, it runs through this corner here. So it's quite a lot higher than it is in, like my dome here probably needs to be a little bit higher. But I'm going to try and sort of wrap this around quite quickly. Just get the general shaping in here, back into there. Again, this is not the correct color. It is at the top up here, but it's not, especially down here. I'm going to just connect that into there. And that gives me my general shaping. And now I can just basically sort of plot in the rest of the colors as I see them. So I can go ahead and say, well, actually, there's these lovely dark areas here, but around them is this lighter pink. So let's grab a lighter color first, because you don't want to jump to your dark tone. So it sits roughly around about here. I'm just going to patch in a bit of sort of pink there. There's another kind of pinky patch here. And there's also a little bit of a pinky patch up towards that top edge over here too. And I can blend them around a bit. Then I can grab the sort of somewhat darker, more saturated version that sits towards the middle area. A little bit over there too. And then I'll grab the darkest, beautiful, really dark purple. Let's take a look here though, because there's roughly like a light pink that runs through the middle, and then it's followed by some orangey tones. So let's go ahead and just get this pink color in here. Again, you can see I'm now like going very close to what I've already drawn, because in the end, we're going to sort of somewhat start blending them together anyway. This is just plotting out the sort of basic colors. Now I need that kind of light orangey tone. That sits a little bit over here. Goes right towards that edge over here. There's no light color. I'm going to zoom in, because then it gets a little bit kind of lighter in the middle, perhaps with the lighting. Nice. And then we'll zoom in again. Over here it gets very, very dark, like a much more burnt color over here on that left hand side. And again, that kind of blends around, doesn't it, into here. And we just want to keep then grabbing all the colors that we can see and kind of just plotting and merging them together. We're going to end up with all that detail on top. So all of this is somewhat going to get blurred, but we do want to kind of just get that base set underneath our, what will be all of our dots. So it's important to kind of grab all the colors that you can see and start just plotting them out. I can see that the pink kind of wraps around, doesn't it, and then fades into like another really lovely bright pink area, like over here and down and into the oranges. So I'm just going to connect them together and then start grabbing some more colors. A deep, beautiful dark purple right over here on this edge, into a very dark brown tone over here as well. And some of them will get even darker, like into like a grey tone. Look at that, like right down here at the very back. And then let's try and find some more in here too. Now, at this stage, once you've started to get like that basic level of color in, you need to keep going, to be fair, like I do, because I want to start drawing in these like light pink strips that sit in the middle. So I need to get everything behind the dots done first. So I need to grab that color where I can, get that in there and start to kind of plot them in. So I can see where that one comes in here. You've got like two either side of it, which nicely kind of mirror it. And then after that, it fades out. So I just need to kind of just plot in a little bit more of this color. You can always go ahead and grab your smudge tool, tap on your smudge tool and use Forester under basics and blur this together a little bit, you know, a little bit of blurring just to soften out some of those quite strong marks in there, because that is quite a gradient kind of look under there. So, you know, replicate that exactly like that, but go back in, grab some of those lovely pink tones. I want to grab like a really kind of hot pink color in there and get that lovely random, it's quite a pretty looking jellyfish, to be fair, with that amount of color just sat underneath the surface there. We'll get into here, we'll grab a little bit of kind of peachish tone again, and maybe I'll blend this together as well, but I'm just trying to just set out the foundations of what will be underneath our little line. So I'm just going to smudge them together just a tiny bit more, and I'm going to get into here now and start grabbing these lovely purpley light colors with a slightly smaller brush size. I'm going to try and plot them out a little bit so I can see where this sort of, again, I'm going to refer to it as a tentacle, comes up into here. I'm going to zoom out, it comes up and into there, and then there's like a gap, and then I can draw in another one, and then they start to, of course, get a little bit thinner, so I'll make my brush size a bit smaller as I make my way around, and they have random shapes, random heights as well as they kind of fade out at the top. I'll go a bit smaller, like a 2%, and try and squeeze in some more of these quite thin ones over here on the edge. And then I'll do the same over here, go a bit bigger, because there's quite a large one in there. And maybe I need to just triple check I've got the right color, and I don't. I have more of a purpley color now, a little bit lighter as well, comes a little bit higher. And then let's go over here, let's grab like, oh, look at that lovely purple blue tone. I think I just shifted at the last second there as I selected that. That's why you should always zoom in, so you get exactly the right marker, the right color. And we're just trying to make sure we get that nice curving effect. Now, to be fair, I think at this point I've got everything I would need in order to start progressing. I think I could definitely get back in there and add a little bit more lightness to it, but we'll carry on because we've got the dots that we need to add in over the top. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer on top of the color there. And we're going to zoom in, of course, and grab the correct color. So zooming in there, some of them are a little bit kind of brown and yellow and everything in between. It looks like I undid my layer there. So I'm going to grab like a general color. Some of them are a bit darker, but we can fix that later. You just need one color to get started with. Same brush, although you could change it to this brush here, the Florentine. That brush is a little bit firmer and more solid. So you can switch it to that one, which is what I'm going to do, because you'll be able to get many, many more dots in here. Now, little extra tip, because we're going to be zoomed in quite a bit here, the other option you can do is go up to your actions. You can go to your canvas and you can add a reference. If you turn this on, you can then go ahead and you'll get your canvas over here for a start. You can scale this up and down and you'll get a little window. So rather than having to keep zooming out and taking a look at it, you can say zoomed in over here and zoom in on the image, which is over on our left-hand side here. So you can get a little window while you're drawing. So that's quite a useful feature, and you can pan and zoom, etc. So that's that middle one that comes into here, I can see, and we're going to go ahead and make sure we've got like the option here of being able to tap and press quite a lot. So I want to press like 2%. Now this may start to hurt your hands. So you'll notice in my brushes, I'm going to go even smaller than that, about 2% in here, because these are really tightly packed. And look at how like they get quite dark down here and then they fade out. And that's like a density kind of thing. They kind of, as they get a little bit further up, they'll start to trickle out. But they're quite sharp shapes. So you may need to go really, really small with your brush size and really draw in every single dot. Otherwise, you can go to the brush above, or sorry, swipe this brush to the left and duplicate it. Then on the brush above, tap on it and go back to stroke path again and set the spacing to about 71% under stroke path. That way you can press really firm, go really small, and you can start like very quickly and easily, like kind of stippling in like this. Again, you have to press quite firm and you will get that kind of, but if you take a look, you do get this really kind of robotic look to it. So you are going to have to kind of, you know, maybe get the basics in here, like this kind of thing. But then you're going to have to probably get in there manually and start doing it. So you can decide what it is you like. I mean, to be fair, like you could, like I said, get the foundations in almost, like a few kind of these lines in here. You can see they get quite tight on the edge over here, which ends up turning them into quite dark lines because they're super, super tight to the edge. I'm going to go back to the actual brush itself because I can press quite firm and just get a lot of really purposeful dots and shapes. Now, don't forget, this is the line we're working to. We're not working to this line here. We're working to this line out here, which was that original, very, very translucent effect and the general shaping, wasn't it, of our brush, of our jellyfish. Come on, Joe, sort it out. It's because I'm doing all of these little lines here and I'm just trying to make sure that, like, eventually scale-wise, they all kind of look right. So as you get towards the center, you're going to end up putting less lines in here because the center has you're looking at it straight on, they start to spread out a bit, but towards the edge, they almost cluster enough that you get this kind of like line outline effect. I'm going to go a bit bigger, so 1%, because they also get a bit chunkier towards the outside edge as well. So I'm going to go to like a 2% and get a lot of these kind of little dashes right on the very edge, because they are quite chunky on the outside. So I've gone 2% there. And if you get your border in, like around the outside, you can make your way inwards if that's a little bit easier. So I'm going to start over here. I think I need to come inwards a little bit with that translucent effect, but I can always go ahead and just adjust that shortly. And again, it doesn't really matter if it's just ever so slightly outward in comparison to the photograph. We are just literally just trying to have some fun today and replicate that. Now, I'm then making my way inwards, and I know somewhat as I start to make my way inwards, I'll need to sort of just space these all out a little bit and consider their shape a bit more. They're a bit more like dots and blobs almost, and they kind of curve round at the top. Around the top of the jellyfish's like translucent area here. And then as they get towards like this bottom here, they become dots. So like in this area here, I could start just drawing in dots with a slightly smaller brush size, like a 2%, and then make my way up towards those slightly larger lines. So yeah, there's loads you can do manually here. Lots and lots of little dashes. This is probably the most manual part of this today, because we just have to get those dots in. You could use something that's a much more sharp brush than the charcoals, but I'm just simply sticking put with what I've already pre-drawn. Like I draw these a couple of times before I bring them to YouTube. So like this will be like, I think this is the third time I've drawn this now. And then I also, because I want to make sure I get the brushes right for what I want to try and sort of portray in the tutorial. And then as we but then otherwise, you can change the brushes to fit your sharpness levels or change it up a little bit. Now here I'm losing the brush color a little bit to the scene in behind, and that's fine. I'll change it in a minute. Lots of dots wrapping their way around here, and of course I need to get in between all these little pink bits. So maybe I'll make my brush size a bit darker, brush color a bit darker, so I can just see it a little bit easier. Just make sure I start to sort of at least dot in the sort of plan for those. And again, I don't have to do every single dot. My hand is already cramping. I'm going to go a bit smaller with the brush size because they get quite small and very, very dotty in there. And yeah, it's just, this is the quite time consuming part of it. Zoom all the way out there and you get the lovely effect in it. The more time you can put into it, the better it will look. It's just as simple as that. Like, it's like anything, isn't it? But it really will look really good if you can spend the time to get the dots looking right. So that kind of tucks under here a little bit more. I'm really happy with the lines, how they look. They've like spaced out quite nicely. And now we can just add in the dots a bit higher and a bit larger. So like 2% with the brush size. I can press like really firm, and I've got the slightly darker color, but that's not a problem because the color is only technically temporary anyway, because I'll be able to adjust them in a second, because there's multiple colors to all of these dots that run around the outside that we need to get in there in a second and start to accommodate a little bit for the shading of the sort of dots that run over the top up here, because they're a bit darker down here in this corner, so you can get really quite aggressive with them down here, and they just start to get a bit more vertical in this center area. God, my hand is struggling at this point. I apologize if yours is too. And that's just because I've picked a brush that has a certain level of pressure sensitivity that you need to press fairly firm in order to get the right level of like opacity. Again, if you were to use something like, even something like a bit like a monoline brush, you'd get a much quicker and easier effect, but you won't get these little rough edges, which we kind of want, because they're not all 100% in terms of opacity. Some of them are literally just like very faint on the very bottom edges and top edges. So I'm zooming out, trying to make sure I get the general impression for what we're trying to do. Again, bit more of a time consuming process this, but I want to change a little bit of how I do tutorials here on my channel this year perhaps, and just hopefully give you something that can challenge you. That's the reason I did the first version of this, which was a timed version, but this one's not timed. We're just going to enjoy ourselves, take the anxiety part of it out, which is what I heard a little bit of feedback of, and just make sure that we're enjoying the process, but also perhaps even learning something new that you've maybe wanted to learn that a standard kind of tutorial won't give you here. That on my channel anyway, there's other artists that won't do tutorials how I've previously done them in the past. They will be far more free-handed, and you grab the colors and so on and all that kind of stuff, whereas I've typically had a lot of hand holding in a good way. I found them very successful. I also found them very fun to do, but sometimes I also want to do something like this personally, of literally just getting a whole design done from replication rather than having to come up with a full design. I want to be able to test my skills as well in that sense. So yeah, it's a little bit of everything really. Now mine is coming together quite nicely, other than the fact this dark edge up here, I need to go to about 2% and get a few more thick curls in here, just around the outside edge here, because it gets very, very, very dense. I might even go a bit darker just so I can see them. I'm not fussed about the color, because the color again is temporary. Just going to get some more in here, just over on this edge, because it just seems to get super, super dark down here. I don't know if it's lighting perhaps as well, but it just looks great. Okay, cool. That's coming across quite well. And I think, to be honest with you, I'm probably done with all of my dots in there. Now, if yours is super light and super faint and you struggled a little bit with your dots, in a minute, you can just simply go ahead and duplicate the layer and you'll get a real massive boost in saturation and saturation and opacity. Sorry. So if I swipe that to the left, for example, and swipe, you can see it just gets a lot darker, a lot quicker as well. So it's up to you. You can do that, or you can swipe to the left and keep hold of them a little bit more faint. Now, when you're done though, you can tap on the layer and alpha lock it, so you can't paint outside of it. If you go to your, keep the same brush in fact, let's go ahead and just take a look at the dome itself, because again, there's dark colors. So I've got a dark color here, but I would probably grab it from like there. And I can see that they're very, very dark up here. That darkness trickles all the way around into here, which if I zoomed in, I can imagine that these are pretty much black. They're quite dark down here, and they really do kind of sit here. So I'm coloring in basically all the dots we've already done, and now just kind of marrying them up to the correct colors. So in the middle, they tend to get this more red tone. Oh, look at that. That is lovely. And then what color do we get down here where they all sort of run into the little points? I can add in that dark tone there. They get way more red towards the middle, which looks absolutely beautiful. Look at all of that color. Lovely. And this is where we can just really mimic the photograph, because you get all of the lovely colors in here. There's so many colors, isn't there? Let's grab another dark tone from like down at the bottom of say this one here, and that one can kind of blend those dark tones to the more saturated tones. Up towards the top, like, well, actually somewhat towards the middle, you get them, and they're way more colorful in that center area. And they come down, they get a little bit darker again as they get towards the bottom. And that's probably trickled a little bit too far over towards the right there. So I'm just going to kind of wiggle that in. It doesn't need to marry up 100%. You're not getting every single one of these dots correct, I'll tell you that for free. And then we'll go right to the very edge again. Grab that really dark tone. That one's definitely not the right color. That was way too blue and purple. Just going to grab the right color. There we go. And that seems to be coming back out as purple every time, but it's actually that color I want. There we go. A little bit around that edge. If we zoom out and we take a look, for example, at the very top edge, so I just need to change that, zoom in. They tend to get a little bit kind of orangey and yellow towards the top. I want them to also be decorated like that. And then right at the very top edge, there's a little bit of darkness on there. So you should end up with a really nice variety of colors that sort of blend around the dome at the top. I'll blend that around as well over here. Lovely stuff. I want to keep that zoomed in because it is quite effective to have this little window over here. It makes for a really easy way of doing this. So when you take a look at the two of them, you should end up with a very similar level already in terms of the colors. Now I can see, for example, I need to zoom in into like this area here and start adding in some additional color underneath. So I'm going to go back down to that layer, grab the color, and I'm just going to start painting that in just up into here. It was just a little bit too low down. Now, if we take a look at the dome itself, look, it's white at the very top where that light's coming down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another new layer underneath the dots. I'm going to grab that sort of whitish color here, whitish blue, and then just on the top there, I'm going to start bringing that lovely highlight in. This is going to give it that lovely lit look to it. Bit bigger on the brush size, about 11%. Once I get a little bit more inwards, and it just fades down. It just fades down, so you just start to get really light with your pressure, but you can press quite firm towards the top, and you will start to really bring in that lovely bit of lighting. Blend that across, and it does come quite low down, so let's take a look. Let's zoom out. It starts to wrap its way around a little bit over here, although it starts to get a lot more faint. So I'm going to press really light. I'm going to go a bit bigger, about 26%, start to bring that down a little bit more into there. I think that is almost bang on. And then what I might do is just grab what the equivalent is in this gap here, which is like a dark blue, and just start layering in that dark blue down here in this corner and fade that up and around. Lovely stuff. Look at that. Now I could definitely get in there and add in some more burnt sort of pinks, but I'm going to carry on because we've only got like one kind of simple step left to do. I keep messing this up, don't I? And that is the lovely little strands that make their way off of here, as well as the pink fluorescent lines. So let's do the pink fluorescent lines. Let's go ahead and create another new layer, just so it's separated. We'll zoom in and we'll take a look because they start to get like a little bit more pinky blue down here. So I'm going to grab that color. I'm going to zoom in. I've still got the front line Florentine brush, which will work out quite nicely because it's got a little extra opacity to it. So down here it gets super frilly, so I'm just varying my pressure as I go along that edge. If I zoom out a little bit more, I can start to see as it comes across, it will of course go up and down, and you can just do whatever you like. And just before in here, we get that lovely big up and down. Now I'm going to grab that pink tone, not the brightest tone, but the pink tone. I'm going to take over from here because there's a little bit of pink and then it takes over completely. And then it comes down here, goes up, and you'll get that lovely frillish look to it. And that can just wiggle its way up and into there. And then I can go a bit bigger with the brush. I was like 8%, blend that out. So I get that kind of slightly softer look to it. Have that kind of trickle in, fade it out, fade it down. Like here, you're fading it down. And look at that, if you zoom all the way out, you're already there. Just then grab the brightest tone in there. Look how sort of bright and hot pink this one's going to be just here. And that looks like we might need to zoom in and just make sure we grab exactly the right color. Zoom, bring the brush size down to like a 3%. And I'm going to just purposely just make this a bit brighter. Like I want to, there we go. Just a little bit of extra. It will look really nice and detailed as well if you take your time with that. Don't add in too much, but just a little dash of it here and there. You can take artistic liberty basically at this point and say, no, I wanna just add in a little bit extra, a little summit. We'll go ahead and grab like the purpley tone that just sits in behind there. Just kind of fade that onto there, kind of blending out the pink into like a bit more of a purple. Now that does carry on though, doesn't it? It just runs its way up and on top of the other tentacles. Now I have to make sure I get a good pink purplish tone. So it comes across here and then kind of flicks out a little bit there, doesn't it? Where I could probably get in there and maybe grab like a little bit of a brighter tone. Might have to sort of exaggerate it a little bit with like a 3%. Yeah, that's too dark. It's gone the other way. So I need to go ahead and just make that a little bit more pinky and a bit whiter, I think, just to take a little bit of a artistic liberty again. A little wiggle along the edge just to make it pop that extra little bit. And then it just carries on. It carries on up into here where we've got like a pinkish tone that sits across the tentacles here. Again, I really do apologize if I'm triggering someone every single time I say tentacles. But yeah, you get the gist. Now, down here, look at this. This is beautiful. And if you notice, there is a little bit of like a hot blue. There is a bit of a brightish blue along the very edge of like here. So you could get in there with like a 2 or 3% and just wiggle your pen along the very edge to get that frilly look. And that runs up and then just disappears under there. But little sort of speckles of blue, little dots right up to the very edge. Oh, love that. And then that also carries on here as well. Like I can get a few little sort of dashes of blue in there right towards the end. And then they just turn into pink. So I can grab the pink color, grab that, and then I can just wiggle my pen. And then where that one kind of comes across, we end up with this lovely big flutter here of like a few areas. Now I need to grab the correct color because it's not coming across. So about 4 or 5% on the brush size. I can just wiggle that along here. It kind of flickers over towards this one at the back, but that equally just wiggles its way up here into here as well. And then you just need to make sure you grab all the right tones. So a bit more pink to like outline it. There we go. And maybe again, just take that artistic liberty, maybe a bit more pink, a bit brighter, a little bit like this. A couple of patches in there are super bright, but they're also super pink as well. Like look at this. This color in here is so saturated. Look at that. And that runs a little bit higher up here too. I've got a little bit of pink that, and I'm going to grab that same color because I can just add in a little bit on the edge over here as well. Just a little bit. And you could go down to like a 2%, if not the smallest size, to be honest with you, and really detail the edge. Like if you wanted to get a bit brighter once again, you could just really detail every little bit of this kind of frilly look to it. And that will really, really, really make it pop in a second when you zoom back out and you see your whole design. Like these little wiggly lines, don't do too much down here because it obviously blends into the darkness. Over there, I might just take a little bit of a liberty as well. And then maybe a little bit more on here as well, just towards here. A little bit to kind of outline it a little bit more. And a little bit up into here. So this is where you get to that stage where you're like, oh, actually, I want to go ahead and make sure it looks how I want it to be presented towards the end in terms of how the finished result will look, more so than replicating the photo. Now here, I just need to make sure that just in here, I'm kind of missing a big chunk of color here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just make sure with a 10% brush size, I just sort of just get that little bit of color in there. It kind of all compiles together. There we go, to create that lovely effect. And again, the final kind of details are that kind of lining there. So if you get to like a bluish, purplish tone, maybe a little bit like this and a bit whiter maybe, you can then go ahead and go to your pens. Now I'm going to change it. I'm going to change my brush. I'm going to change it to the optional pencils and the Brunny brush pencil. Now if I tap on this, I have gone ahead and gone to stroke path and stabilization and just increase the amount of streamline, but also the amount of stabilization. If you take a look at the brush, well, it's a pencil, isn't it? But it's got that little bit of a soft edge to it, which kind of mimics a little bit what it is we are doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and tap on my little reference and close that. I can always bring that back in. That comes from up here and that comes sort of down here, and I've got the stabilization on because we've got these sort of frilly lines and they'd get lost in the water and just held by the water, and that sort of floaty timeless look to it. So that comes down here as well. That kind of flicks over to there. There's another one that kind of comes in from here and kind of mimics this line quite a lot. There's another one that kind of makes its way along here as well, and that kind of flicks down. And then there's one over here. Now I've made them white because I want them to be super easy and obvious to see. Look at that, that one comes under there like that. That's beautiful. That can run across there and that kind of curls out like that a little bit. But you can go ahead then and do like a few things. You could zoom in and grab the correct color, like a bit more of a whatever blue that is. Then go to the layer and tap on it and alpha lock it. Now, bearing in mind, I've accidentally drawn them on the same layer as my frilly areas, and that's fine. I'll just have to work around that. I'll have to go to Forest and Basics and then just fade out a few of those lines, maybe make them a little bit less like super prominent, but some of them I might want to keep a bit more prominent because again, it's like working out what you want the design to look like at the end. You know, what's that kind of finished look to it that you want? Now I can see also like there's a few little sort of speckles of like really bright color here, like that's super bright down there. I'm going to get into like a detailing stage now, so I'm just going to create a new layer. I'm going to go back to my Florentine brush, get that brush size nice and small, probably down to about 1 pixel to be honest with you. That little bit of extra, little bit of lighting here, isn't it? It's just like a little bit on there. There's like little dashes of color in that kind of frilliness, which sits around about here. And there's just little dashes of just little bits of something, just life, bubbles, everything around it. There's a couple of little sort of twinkles of color on there too. And I've grabbed the same color and just carried on, and that should be fine. Now the only exception would probably be the background. If you want to go ahead and add more to it, you can do. I think one easy change I could do is go to this dome here that I created, which sits underneath. I could go ahead and go to my adjustments, saturation, and I could just simply just crank up the saturation, which would get a little bit closer to that. I could probably bring down the brightness a tiny bit as well. Just the tiniest bit, 1%. Saturation's gone up a little bit more to get it a bit closer to that one. Could probably go up even higher, about 60%, and then maybe just get back in there and grab like that quite light tone here that just trickles its way through. I'm going to go back to my brush though and grab the Nut Grove. Just wiggle that through into this area here. So it's got that lovely brighter spot running through it, which kind of runs down into there. Punching out the highlights at this point, giving yourself that lovely last little bit of contrast. It gets super white on the top edge up here, so I want to make sure that that's nice and white. There's a little bit of a speckle of light just in here as well. And this one runs all the way up to here, so I can connect them two together basically. Add in another little bit of pink just beside that, which is missing. And then I can maybe grab a little bit of a darker tone again and kind of just add that in there just a little bit. And I think we're almost there. The exception of just getting right down into this corner here and grabbing what looks like a bit of a darkish red color here, right on the very edge. And that very quickly falls off and just disappears. And then I might grab a little bit of a brighter tone here too, just try and punch these out a bit more. Maybe even make them a little bit whiter again, just so I can be in control more so of like the highlights and where those most bright spots should live. I'm just entertaining these little lines here for a second before probably calling it a day. Now the only other thing is right at the very back, if we go ahead and create like a new layer right in front of this white dome here that we created initially and create a new layer, we can see that there's a little bit of dark tone just here, and that kind of comes through a tiny bit on the opposite side, but not so much like underneath the tentacle. So there's like a little bit of kind of darkness here. I can just kind of blend out the idea of it at least underneath here, and it definitely is a lot more apparent over here. So I can just bring that in, kind of blending in like this dark random thing in the background a little bit more, just sits underneath, and that's all you'd need to do really. And if we take a look at some of these have got lovely little white specks on them where the light is coming down from above. So we're going to go right back up to that layer at the very top that we created, bring that down. I might even go back to the Florentine brush, set that really small, like a 1%. I just want to dance some bright edge, don't I, on some of the edges of some of these over here, a little bit on some of the edge over here. And these are that little extra details that could really help the whole thing to pop. They're very, very, very small. There's only a few of them. A little bit running on some of these. A little bit around the outside edge. Very, very minor amounts. Trying to really tell myself to not go nuts with it. That looks very cool though, doesn't it? Just brings it all to life. And as I said, when you're done, you can go ahead and do one of two things. You can save it as it is, or one thing I would do is I'd go back to my gallery. I'd go ahead and swipe the canvas to the left and duplicate it. So you've got one with the image and one without. And then on this version here, I'd just go to my actions, go to crop and resize, and just drag this middle bar across to the middle of your design. Zoom in just to triple check you don't crop out any of your photo as well as your design. Hit the tick. and you're left with your design. And now you can turn off your drawing guide as well and just see what you've replicated. And if you pinch with 2 fingers and go full screen with 4, you end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. A little bit longer, again, slightly different approach, but please provide feedback. If it's not something you guys are enjoying, we won't do any more of them. But if you do, make sure to tag me in Finished Creations over on Instagram and Facebook. Make sure to come and check me out over on Patreon, because that's where I post 3 exclusive tutorials every single month. Subscribe to this channel as well. Make sure you are subscribed. We are on our road towards 60,000 subscribers. So all your subscriptions and support would be much appreciated on the channel. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll love this one on screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.